House of Commons.
Order, order.
I beg to move... Point of order. Mr Speaker, I beg to move that the House do now sit in private.
The question is that the House do sit in private. As many as have their opinion say aye. On the contrary, no. No. I think the noes have it. The noes have it. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Health and Social Care Safety and Quality Bill, second reading.
Now.
Mr Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. This bill is all about patients, their care and safety. My commitment to this comes directly out of the findings of the Francis report, particularly the second Francis report, following the public inquiry into the instances of dreadful care at the Mid Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust in my constituency. The work of Cure the NHS, led by Julie Bailey, who challenged that care, and supported by a group of my constituents and those of my honourable friend for Stone, has brought us to today's bill. In Sir Robert Francis's letter to the Secretary of State for Health presenting his report, he wrote, "In introducing the first report, I said that it should be patients, not numbers, which counted. That remains my view. The demands for financial control, corporate governance, commissioning and regulatory systems are understandable and in many cases necessary. But it is not the system itself which will ensure that the patient is put first day in and day out. Any system should be capable of caring and delivering an acceptable level of care to each patient treated. But this report shows that this cannot be assumed to be happening." In his reply to the Francis report on 6th of February 2013 in this House, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister said, "Quality of care means not accepting that bed sores and hospital infections are somehow occupational hazards, that a little bit of these things is somehow okay. It is not okay. They are unacceptable. Full stop, end of story. That is what zero harm, the jargon for this, means." The Prime Minister's words captured the essence of this issue precisely. Most of the recommendations of the Francis report have been accepted and many already implemented. In addition, there have been other very important decisions by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, such as the appointment of chief inspectors of hospitals, general practice and social care. These are already having a profound effect on improving the safety and quality of care which patients receive. Our NHS, using the best of medical science and skills, combined with professionalism and compassion, delivers extraordinary repair, treatment and healing to the vast majority of its patients. Yet it can also forget that and cause harm to sick patients that is completely avoidable. It is that very ability which it is the intention of this bill to reduce and hopefully eliminate. It arises out of a determination to ensure that what happened at Stafford and indeed elsewhere should not be repeated. It seeks to make sure that the focus on safety and quality of care we are seeing is not only maintained but strengthened and, most importantly, cannot be reversed. Of course, Mr Speaker, legislation on its own will not guarantee safe and high-quality care. Leadership, culture and resources are all vital elements. But by making clear in law what is expected of those providing healthcare, it will go a long way to doing so. Firstly, this bill, in Clause 1, changes the Secretary of State's power to a duty, from a may to a must, to ensure that all those providing health and social care make zero avoidable harm their target. Patient safety is therefore put at the top of the list of what must be inspected for. One important way of ensuring that patients receive the safe and high-quality care which we would all wish to see is better integration between services, both health and social care. That's why clauses 2, 3 and 4 of this bill seek to give an impetus to integration through the requirement for a single patient identifier and a responsibility to share information. Professional bodies play a vital role in improving safety and quality of care by setting standards, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. My honourable friend will be aware of some small concerns raised by the BMA in connection with some of the detail of his bill. I wonder if my honourable friend could confirm to the House that he is confident that these concerns will be able to be dealt with in committee.
I'm most grateful to my honourable friend who's shown a very strong and keen and sincere interest in this bill. And yes, I have just, in fact, seen the submission which the BMA has made, and I recognise the concerns that they raise. I believe they can be addressed and they should be seriously listened to and can in fact be dealt with in detail in the committee. And maybe what I'm going on to say in this speech, I hope, will address some of those concerns in any case. But we must take the views of the BMA representing doctors extremely seriously. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, professional bodies play a vital role in improving safety and quality of care by setting standards of practice and by ensuring that high standards of conduct are maintained. Clause 5 of this bill and the schedule to it ensure that the professional bodies within the medical, nursing and care professions have the same overarching objectives which will benefit patients. Mr. Speaker, I first propose to set out the context of the bill and then to go into detail of each of its three parts. In doing so, I will seek to address points which have been raised with me, and in particular whether we need legislation to achieve the aim of the bill, patient safety and quality of care. I'm grateful to the team at the Department of Health who have helped in the preparation of the bill, and indeed the Minister, whose earlier proposals in his 10-minute rule bill have informed the measures on the integration of services. I also thank the Shadow Secretary of State and the Opposition Health Team for their interest in the bill, the Chair of the Health Select Committee and other colleagues who have taken the time to discuss it with me, and to those in the health and social care professions who contributed their thoughts. I'm also very grateful to Ken Lowndes, whose work on patient safety has been fundamental to my work on this bill, and to my honourable friend, the member for Stone, who first called for a public inquiry and has supported this work all along. And I wish to thank my staff, James Cantrell, Pauline Ingle, Hetty Bailey, Alex Simpson and Emily Mills, all of whom, but especially James and Pauline, have contributed in many ways. And above all, I wish to thank my wife, Dr. Janet Lefroy, who has patiently discussed the theory and reality of patient safety and care with me over many years. Mr. Speaker, in 1863, in her preface to her notes on hospitals, Florence Nightingale wrote, "It may seem a strange principle to enunciate as the very first requirement in a hospital that it should do the sick no harm. This principle, extended to all health and social care services, lies behind the whole bill, but in particular Clause 1, to which I will turn now. We're in a time where, quite rightly, there is increasing scrutiny of the safety and quality of care in our health and social care services. There are no accurate figures for how many people die avoidably while in the care of health or social care services in England. A recent study estimated that perhaps 12,000 people a year in hospitals alone die from avoidable causes. If we take a figure of 12,000, this is more than 4 times the annual number of deaths on roads in the UK. But this is not just about those who die avoidably. It's also about those who live, but whose lives are profoundly affected by the avoidable errors. Perhaps they are left with disability or mental scars. And it's also about those who care for them, who may have caused the avoidable harm and for whom it casts a shadow over their entire life. In many cases, straightforward patient safety procedures and practices would have protected both the patients and the members of staff from the consequences of avoidable harm. No patient wants to be harmed. No one in the NHS will willingly do so. The essence of zero avoidable harm is for the professionals and the organisations for which they work to convey to the patient, we are healthcare providers because we want to treat and cure people. This is our contribution to humanity. We owe it to you, the patient, when you submit to our treatment not to harm you by being unprofessional, inattentive or negligent, and also to have made all possible preparations in case we make an error so that it will not harm you. We will, of course, advise you of all risk inherent in what we're going to do for you. So when I speak of zero avoidable harm, Mr. Speaker, that is the culture I'm speaking about. These principles, procedures and practices for zero avoidable harm are in place in many hospitals and other care providers across the country, but they are neither universal nor are they standard. This is not about bureaucracy. This is about ensuring that health and social care has the same approach to safety as other activities in which safety is critical. Air travel, for instance, or the nuclear industry. Just last weekend, I noticed at one of the manufacturing sites in my constituency, which deals in chemicals, a board prominently displayed which said that the site had gone for more than 1,000 days without an accident. I fully acknowledge that health and social care is highly complex and becoming increasingly so. But for those who use complexity as an excuse not to draw lessons from other professions which have had to make safety a priority, I would simply say that is not good enough. There is much excellent work going on in safety science, systematising and standardising many elements of health and indeed social care to ensure that variability can be eliminated. Safety-critical sectors in the UK and elsewhere have for years been using what are called human factors to enable all staff to perform at their best, not only technically, but also in communicating with patients and colleagues. Human factors are the key to building a culture of safety, or an open culture in which staff are able to speak up about safety, a just culture in which blame is absent, but fair accountability is the norm. Turning to the detail of Clause 1 of the Bill, Mr. Speaker, at the moment, regulated activities, which are defined by the Health and Social Care Act 2008, Clause 8, subsection 2, as activity involving or connected with the provision of health and social care, these are regulated through regulations which are made under Section 20 of the same Act. That section provides that the Secretary of State may impose, in relation to regulated activities, any requirements which he thinks fit. Clause 20 further goes on to say that such regulations may in particular make provision with a view to securing the health, safety and welfare of persons for whom any such service is provided. So the Secretary has the power, a may, but not the duty, a must, to impose regulations regarding the safety of patients. The message which this could send out is that patient safety is not essential. Of course, Secretaries of State and most recently heads of the Care Quality Commission have made it clear that patient safety is of vital importance, but that did not apply at Stafford Hospital and indeed in many other places. Clause 1 of my bill amends the 2008 Act by substituting the following for Section 20, subsection 1 and part of subsection 2 of that Act. The Secretary of State must, by regulations, impose requirements that the Secretary of State considers necessary to secure that services provided in the carrying on of regulated activities cause no avoidable harm to the persons for whom the services are provided. So it is now incumbent on the Secretary of State specifically to require that those providing health and social care services cause no avoidable harm. The Care Quality Commission will therefore need to assure itself, when inspecting those providers, that they have the policies, systems and procedures in place which tackle avoidable harm. As the explanatory notes to the bill state, current CQC registration requirements, which the government is introducing, which will introduce new fundamental standards of care, would not be changed as a result of Clause 1, as the new regulations satisfy the new duty. But the clause ensures that these regulations could not be watered down in the future to reduce the emphasis on patient safety. The bill defines harm as being avoidable, and I quote, unless the person providing the service cannot reasonably avoid it, whether because it is an inherent part or risk of a regulated activity and for another reason. It may be argued, and I know this is one of the concerns that have been raised by the BMA, that it is impossible precisely to define avoidable harm in every instance, and therefore that we should not attempt to do so. However, the very fact that so many cases of avoidable harm, sometimes leading to death or other serious consequences, manifestly do occur is a reason to ensure that it receives the highest possible priority, even if there may be arguments over the definition at the very margins. Some may understandably raise the concern that the desire to tackle avoidable harm might lead to professionals simply not taking any risks. But the bill covers this by excluding from the definition harm that cannot be reasonably avoided. As in many instances, a test of reasonableness, which is included in this bill, is a sensible way to address this. Instances of avoidable harm would include, for instance, operations being performed on the wrong limb, patients being left without adequate hydration or nutrition, patients being left alone in A&E for long periods without any attention, poor records resulting in the wrong drugs being administered, neglect as a result of wards being staffed below safe levels. In my experience, and I'm sure in that of colleagues, other members of this House, the vast majority of instances of avoidable harm would come under one of these or similar categories. There would be no question about whether they had arisen because professionals were afraid to take risks. They would come from poor clinical skills, faulty record keeping, inefficient administration, or a lack of care and compassion. The fact that the instances of avoidable harm vary so much across the health and social care sectors in itself shows that the problem can be tackled. How many lives would be saved if all providers had the same standards as the best in class? That is why it is so important to address avoidable harm through legislation. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to clauses 2, 3 and 4 of the bill. These are about continuity of information, which must be, and I quote, to facilitate the provision to the individual of health services or adult social care in England and be in the individual's best interests. Again, this is all about the patient. There are two provisions. The first is for the use of a consistent identifier for a person by the provider of health or social care. The second is to ensure that relevant information is shared in support of people's direct care by the introduction of a duty to share information. Both these provisions are designed to help with the integration of health and social care, which is so greatly needed and which both government and opposition have said is essential for the future. Before I turn to the details, I would like to quote from a letter sent to me by my constituent, Mrs. Janet Powell, who was delighted to hear about the bill. She described two recent experiences of the lack of integrated information, explaining, "After breaking her femur in November 2013, my mother was admitted to the Manor Hospital at Walsall. In February 2014, she was admitted to Stafford Hospital suffering from heart failure. In July 2014, she went to New Cross Hospital, Wolverhampton, for her cataract operation. For each of these admissions, she has a different hospital number. We have had to repeat vital information about her medical conditions each time she has been dealt with by different teams." Mrs. Powell's mother was fortunate to have relatives who were able to be with her on each occasion and give the vital information about her conditions. But for many people, that is not the case. And even if it were, it would still be inefficient and leave open the possibility that vital information regarding the patient and their care would be omitted. The requirement for the use of a consistent identifier would make the accessing of accurate and timely information about a patient's condition much easier. But the bill stresses in Clause 2, subsection 5A, that the requirement to use a consistent identifier would only apply if it is likely to facilitate the provision to the individual of health services or adult social care in England and be in the individual's best interests. As you would expect, the bill contains provisions for the identifier not to be used in certain circumstances, including where the individual objects or would be likely to object to that, and where the information concerns the provision of services by an anonymous access provider, for instance, sexual health services. It also makes clear that the professional must still comply with the Data Protection Act and with any common law duty of care or confidence. The introduction of a duty to share information for their care and treatment, again only if it is in the person's best interests, is aimed at ensuring that medical records are shared appropriately between the professionals in the NHS and care sector who are responsible for the care of the patient. This is especially important when they move between organisations along their care pathway. The 2013 Caldecott Review of Information Governance to share or not to share, found that there is a culture of anxiety which prevents information being shared between organisations. It found that the legislative landscape contributed to this, with staff saying that a risk-averse attitude to sharing was a barrier to sharing and caring for people. The review said that the duty to share information in such circumstances can be as important as the duty to protect patient confidentiality. Dame Fiona concluded that health and social care organisations should have the confidence to share information in the best interests of patients within the essential broader framework of protecting personal patient data. Again, the bill provides the very same important safeguards as those in respect of the consistent identifier. I do not for one moment pretend that these provisions alone will make fully integrated health and social care a reality, but they will certainly help, I believe, to remove some of the obstacles to it. Mr. Speaker, the final part of the bill, Clause 5 and Schedule 1, sets out 3 objectives of regulation: public protection, maintaining public confidence in the professions, and upholding standards. Again, the driver for this is the safety and care of patients. When I presented the bill at first reading, the long title said that it would make provision about the disposal of cases concerning a person's fitness to practice a health or social care profession. It was indeed my intention to do this. Some of the regulatory bodies have been frustrated by the limitations on their ability to deal with a person's fitness to practice. However, I've subsequently learned that such was the level of detail required to introduce the provisions that they would have made my bill too long and complex for a private member's bill. So this bill concentrates on the vital overarching duty to protect the health, safety and well-being of the public. When the serious failures set out in the second Francis report were debated in the other place, the noble Lord Hill, then Leader of the House, said, "The regulatory bodies in particular have questions to answer. The Nursing and Midwifery Council and the General Medical Council need to explain why, so far, no one has been struck off. The Secretary of State for Health has today invited them to explain what steps they will take to strengthen their systems of accountability in the light of this report. And we will ask the Law Commission to advise on sweeping away the Nursing and Midwifery Council's outdated and inflexible decision-making process." The Law Commission, to whom we are greatly indebted, has produced an excellent draft bill with an accompanying report entitled Regulation of Health and Social Care Professionals dealing with these matters. The report states, given the importance of health and social care professionals' regulations, it is a matter of some concern that its UK legal framework is fragmented, inconsistent and poorly understood. The report describes piecemeal growth of this regulation since the establishment of the General Medical Council in 1858, which has become, to quote the report, a framework which is neither systematic nor coherent and contains a wide range of inconsistencies and idiosyncrasies. As part of its work, the Law Commission therefore proposed in Recommendation 13 that an overarching duty to protect the public should be established in a single statute for all the regulatory bodies. The recommendation states, and I quote, "The main objective of each regulator and the Professional Standards Authority should be to protect, promote and maintain the health, safety and well-being of the public. The regulators and the authority also have the following general objectives: to promote and maintain public confidence in the profession and to promote and maintain proper professional standards and conduct for individual registrants." It is this recommendation, Mr. Speaker, which will be given effect by Clause 5 of my bill. The question might reasonably be asked, why not simply wait for the entire bill, with all the details of changes to regulatory body powers, and introduce the overarching duty then? Let me be clear that I'm a very strong advocate of introducing the entire Law Commission bill at the earliest opportunity. Indeed, I would urge the next government to do so. But I believe, and this is supported by regulators who've written to me, that introducing the overarching duty to protect the public, together with maintaining public confidence in the professions and promoting and maintaining proper professional standards and conduct, is a very important matter. It should not be left any longer. The Commission's report explains why. It says that fitness to practice panels have, in some cases, adopted an overly restrictive approach to the test of fitness to practice impairment. They go on to say, and I quote, "In particular, the concern is that in cases of clinical misconduct or deficient professional performance, they are more likely to look at whether the instances of clinical misconduct are remediable than to fully consider all the factors, including the public confidence in the professions." They go on to conclude, if this concern is correct, then we think that the panels in question must have misunderstood the correct legal position, namely that regard must be had to all of the factors reflected in the objectives when deciding impairment, irrespective of the particular grounds being considered. Our intention is that the wording of the general objectives in the draft bill and duties to have regard to them should help to clarify the existing legal position. I have, Mr. Speaker, enormous respect for the healthcare professions. Indeed, 3 members of my closest family work in or are training for them. They have led the world in many ways, and indeed hundreds of them are at this very moment showing their courage and commitment by volunteering to tackle the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. One of the most important things that we as legislators can do is to provide these professionals with the framework they need so that poor practice will not be tolerated and that the public will have the highest degree of confidence in them. Clause 5 will help achieve this. Mr. Speaker, I said at the beginning of my speech that this bill is all about patients. It will put safety at the heart of healthcare by making the Secretary of State responsible for bearing down on avoidable harm. It will help the vital integration of health and social care services, which will improve both quality and safety by introducing a consistent identifier and a duty to share information. And it will make clear that the main objective of each regulator of the healthcare professions is the promotion, protection and maintenance of the health, safety and well-being of the public. None of this will absolutely guarantee that the failure of safety and care described in Sir Robert Francis's first report and the failure of the NHS and regulators set out in his second will not happen again. It depends on other things which cannot be legislated for, such as culture and leadership, and of course those which can, such as the commitment of resources. But it is my belief and hope that it will make a recurrence much less likely. My constituents in Stafford and those of my honourable friends in Stone, Cannock and South Staffordshire will then know that all they have gone through over so many years will not have been in vain.
Order. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Mr. David Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Stafford, for bringing in this bill this morning. As the Chamber has heard, he has set out comprehensively and great detail and with great clarity the detail and the content of the bill. I should also congratulate him on having the foresight to include as one of the sponsors of this bill our honourable friend, the member for Mid-Norfolk, who is now, of course, the government minister answering for the government for the bill. It was a smart move, honourable friend, and I congratulate him for that. Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to detain the House long with my comments about this bill, but it does seem to me that our National Health Service, which everyone in this country can at times perhaps take for granted that it's always there, and whatever the political arguments may be about the NHS, we all know that it is a bedrock of British society. It is part and parcel of what the fabric of this country, and it is essentially, when it boils down to it, made up of 2 things. First of all, there's the scientific element, the technical expertise of the scientists and the doctors and the people who put the drugs together and study the biology of the human and the interaction of the drugs on the human. There's all that science side. There's the science side. But there's also the human side. There's the care side. When someone's ill, okay, they rely on the need for the scientists to come up with a solution. But sometimes, maybe because there is no solution and the doctors cannot, and the scientists say, I'm sorry, we just can't really help you, there is no solution. And sadly, even after decades of advances, there are still all too many ailments that afflict the human condition where that applies, where there is no scientific solution to the individual problem. And therefore, in those cases, and indeed those cases where people, for whatever reason, may be nearing the end of their lives, it does come down to the human touch, to care and the everyday things which aren't really related to science at all, just to common humanity. I think that we have seen, most probably notably of all in my honourable friend's constituency in Stafford, that regrettably sometimes, and the reasons have been well explored, that for whatever reason, sometimes that care is not there. And I'm not going to stand here and blame A or B or C for whatever happened. Whatever happens, happened. We are where we are. And, you know, terrible things have happened. Care has not been up to standard. We all accept that. But what we must now look to is it possible to redesign the regulatory framework in such a way as to try and reduce the risk of what has happened in the past from ever happening again. And I do not pretend that this bill will 100% achieve that. And my support for it is not based on that premise. My support for it is based on the premise that, on balance, this will be an improvement. It seems to be to make absolute sense that the first provision that the bill seeks to introduce, namely that there is a duty, an obligation to inspect for care, must be right. I think there will be millions outside of this chamber this morning who would be frankly amazed that that's not the case already. And it seems to me that it is entirely uncontroversial to suggest that to put forward into legislation and to enshrine in law that should be a requirement of the regulator in our National Health Service. And then, secondly, the idea of having a common identifier. It seems to me, again, to be a matter not just of common identifier, but a matter of common sense. Time and time again, when I discuss with members of my family who've, it's happened very recently, and sadly, to many occasions where members of my own family have had to go into hospital, they said, oh, the only thing that really annoys me is constantly having to give information, and it must be a saving in time for our NHS to have a common identifier. I'm pleased that the professional bodies support this. There are one or two technical and minor concerns, which I think the bill in that clause goes a long way to dealing with, and I'm sure any further concerns can be dealt with in committee. So on balance, I think this is a sensible bill. It's been very carefully explained to us this morning. I wish it a speedy passage through this House and in the other place.
No. Fiona Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for Stafford on his bill, which, if implemented, has the potential to provide significant improvements to the treatment and care of patients requiring medical assistance right across this country. Indeed, the improvements proposed by the bill would have an immediate and very real impact. The National Health Service is an institution which this whole nation can be proud of, which serves our society with outstanding professionalism and admirable compassion. However, as a few specific terrible instances have shown, there is room for improvement. I salute the tireless work of the Honourable Member for Stafford to do everything possible to ensure that we never again see tragedies of the type reported from Mid Staffordshire Hospital in this country again. Indeed, the Honourable Member for Stafford's constituents have cause to be extraordinarily proud of him as their elected representative, and the thoughtful, tireless and effective work he has done on their behalf in response to the issues raised at Mid Staffordshire Hospital. I do not believe that any member in this House could have worked harder for their constituents in this connection. He has raised their concerns in this House countless times, and this bill is a further, carefully considered and utterly compassionate response, so characteristic of the Honourable Member, to those events, and makes a focused, effective and above all practical proposal. It has one overriding focus: patient care. It deserves full support and passage through this House. Yeah. Its proposals are specific, realistic and immediately applicable. The changes it could bring about will be real in the lives of real people right across the country at their weakest and most vulnerable moments. As I've said, there have been particular situations which have hit the headlines. However, whilst the extent of those particular issues may be at the extreme end, as a House we must remember that they are part of a wider national picture, and we must take lessons from those situations to inform policy moving forward. This bill does just that. As I said, Mr. Speaker, it is all about patients and their care. It is about promoting consistency across the country so that all patients are cared for safely and that they are seen to be cared for safely to an accepted and understood standard. The NHS is an institution which we as the British people own, fund and use, and it's right that we should have concern for public confidence in the quality and safety of care provided by it. I understand concerns that the NHS cannot be run on the basis of public opinion, and I will speak to these concerns more specifically when I come to clause 5 of the bill, but this does not negate the fact that public confidence in the NHS is an essential concern, not an optional extra. Indeed, an NHS or a local NHS hospital which loses the confidence of the public will quickly cease to be able to effectively serve the community it is designed for. So the first purpose of the bill is to set in stone the priority of patient safety in NHS standards, as the Honourable Member has said, not just as a power but as a duty of the Care Quality Commission. As the Honourable Member has said, what we have learned from the Francis report is that patient safety is not an optional extra. It is essential and at the heart of good health care. The recognition of every single person's individual dignity and value is something that has characterised the proud history of the NHS and which must always remain central to its practice, no matter what pressures it comes under on a wider scale. The priority of safety in the work of CQCs will help enshrine individuals' dignity in a system which inevitably must think of what is efficient in the wider structural picture. But putting safety first and foremost will ensure that it is not lost amongst bureaucracy and procedures. Clearly, the nature of the NHS means that healthcare professionals are always under all sorts of pressures to decide how they can allocate their resources of time, expertise and treatments most effectively. But this clause will be a buttress to the rights and dignity of each and every individual within that larger picture. It will make sure that safety is one of the key non-negotiables guiding professionals and institutions as they make decisions. This part of the bill acknowledges there is no such thing as risk-free healthcare and allows for a certain margin for where the person providing the service cannot reasonably avoid it. But the responsibility this will place permanently on healthcare professionals Institutions and those assessing CQCs should ensure that the type of tragedies in patient care we have seen in recent past are far less likely to happen in the future. Ideally, of course, none of them in this House would want to see them happen and be reported again at all. The second aim of this bill regards transparency and integration of healthcare. A more integrated healthcare system must surely be a better healthcare system, promoting as it would shared expertise, shared learning and greater safeguards. The care provided for patients should reflect the fact that disconnected and fragmented healthcare is weak healthcare, and this section of the bill will aid healthcare professionals not just as regards safety but good practice across the board, hopefully in simplifying, rather than as some may fear making more complex, the system of healthcare provision for patients. A consistent patient identifier and wider information sharing should create clearer channels for the integration of health and social care of individuals. And this is the way of the future, particularly since we see now the need of our increasing elderly population. And I applaud the member for these practical proposals. As I've already mentioned, the NHS is a unique institution with a unique connection to the public. And so public confidence is not an optional extra. However, to achieve that requires transparency. Indeed, I'm sure that many healthcare professionals in the NHS will welcome greater transparency. The overwhelming majority of those working in it do an outstanding job, one of which they and we can be proud of. I note the British Medical Association has certain concerns about the NHS number being used as a universal identifier. And so I'm pleased to highlight that the bill doesn't make that a requirement. It doesn't require which particular identifier must be used. It is the principle of there being merit in having one which this bill seeks to promote. Which identifier will be used can be left to the discretion of the Secretary of State, who I am sure will consult with interested parties. The provisions for sharing information in this bill are also important. They will facilitate better healthcare treatment for every individual across all areas of their treatment, will allow professionals to do a better job, and allow patients to know with confidence that those looking after them are fully informed about their care requirements before they provide treatment. Currently, patients cannot be sure that their medical and care history and priorities are being shared between professionals responsible for their care. My honourable friend has cited cases where this has caused problems, undoubtedly typical of many. Of course, care must be taken to ensure that information is shared in a responsible way which upholds the privacy of the individual. That is critical. Questions of who information is shared with and how consent is assumed or obtained from patients are important, and there will be opportunity for further discussion of those matters in this House at committee stage. As the bill quite rightly points out, patient data should not be shared where it is not appropriate or in an unsafe manner. For example, where a person's medical record contains confidential information about another person. Critically, the sharing of information must always be in the best interests of that person's care and treatment. This measure would not require sharing of identifiable information for purposes other than of direct care. But as Dame Fiona Caldicott has said, for too long, people have hidden behind the obscurity of the Data Protection Act or alleged rules of information governance in order to avoid taking decisions that benefit the service user or patient. Personal data must be protected lawfully, but common sense and compassion must prevail. The third and final aim of this bill is to ensure that the various healthcare regulators, including the Professional Standards Agency, when making decisions on particular courses of conduct or misconduct, have consistent overall objectives in mind. The maintenance of public safety, public confidence in the relevant profession, and proper professional standards and conduct on the part of healthcare professionals. These proposals have not sprung up in a vacuum. They are consistent with the recommendations of the Law Commission's report, Regulation of Health and Social Care Professionals. They noted with concern the inconsistencies in the way different professional regulators assess individual fitness to practice. So this section of the bill, recommended by experts, should ensure that we will see fewer examples of poor practice and fewer examples of poor practice properly addressed. Everyone, practitioners and regulators, would know the primary principles by which professional performance in the healthcare system is to be judged. I understand that some professionals and the BMA have concerns that the link to public confidence could lead to an inappropriate link between volatile public opinion and the decision of regulators. These are reasoned concerns, but they underestimate, I believe, the capacity of regulators to make appropriately sound judgments against set benchmarks, and the legal position already requires attention to be paid to public confidence. The Law Commission's report stated, "The concern is that in cases of clinical misconduct or deficient professional performance, the regulators," and I'm going to augment a little for the benefit of the House on what the expression "the regulators" means, because it is really very extensive. It is an extensive group of organisations. The regulators are more likely to look at whether the instances of clinical misconduct or performance are remediable than to fully consider all of the factors, including public confidence in the profession. This bill addresses this concern. So concerns that this will lead to inappropriate links between regulation and public opinion, and perhaps especially as it relates to so-called scare stories in the press, should prove unfounded. Far from it, this bill should include greater clarity and rigour into the grave task of regulators in assessing professional standards and promoting best practice. The impact of this bill in this regard should not be underestimated. The list of regulators includes, and this is the list of bodies which regulate health and care professionals in the UK and which would be affected by this bill in such a positive way. This list is extensive, including the General Chiropractic Council, the General Dental Council, the General Medical Council, the General Optical Council, the General Osteopathic Council, the Health and Care Professions Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and the General Pharmaceutical Council. In closing, let me repeat my support for this profound and potentially far-reaching... I certainly shall.
I'm most grateful to her for taking on the role of enunciating
Yes.
all those regulatory bodies. But would she agree with me that actually we would be wrong to downplay the great common sense of the British people when talking about public confidence? Public confidence in healthcare professionals, by any objective, reasonable measure, is at a very, very high level. And we don't just need to look at press headlines for that. Would she agree with me that actually, when it comes down to it, the British people have a huge amount of common sense, and that the profession should not be afraid of public opinion because it is very much on their side?
I entirely agree, and in saying what I have said, I in no way want to denigrate the intervention that my honourable member has made. I absolutely agree with him. So in closing, let me repeat my support for this profound and potentially far-reaching bill, one which, if passed, would influence the life of every citizen in this country. And let me repeat my support for the excellent work the honourable member has done in bringing it to the House, working to drive up standards in the NHS, locally in his constituency and nationally, and to protect people across the country from a repetition of the sad and tragic events documented at Mid-Staffordshire. This bill will strengthen relationships between patients and healthcare professionals and between the NHS and public in general. It will help lift confidence in the NHS even further, and most of all, it will help ensure that every person who relies on the NHS in their most vulnerable moments will be safer wherever they live and in whatever their condition. And for that reason, I commend the honourable member's bill to the House.
Mr. Jamie Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House has an awful lot of business to attend to this morning. That said, I think this bill deserves some real consideration in some detail. The bill clearly has widespread support across the House, including from this side of the House, and also from medical professionals right across the NHS, although some groups have raised a number of concerns, and I'm sure that the Honourable Member for Stafford will be able to address those at some point today. I know he would want to do that. I'll be grateful for him to take the time to do that as well. The bill is made up of three key areas. Part one relates to the provision of care which avoids harm. and requires the Secretary of State to bring forward regulations setting out the requirements on providers registered with the Care Quality Commission to ensure that the services they provide do not cause avoidable harm. Clearly, this is a principle that we would all support. All of us have learnt the lessons of what happened in the Honourable Member's constituency, and none of us want to see those repeated in any part of our health economy anywhere in our country. We want the very best care for our family and friends, and harm-free care should be something that we all strive for at all times. We know that our doctors, nurses and other medical staff work incredibly hard, as honourable members on the government benches have said, work incredibly hard, often in exceptionally trying circumstances. And the government, any government, must do everything within its power at all times to support these professionals. This is surely beyond question. The second part of the bill relates to the continuity of information and how this information is shared between providers of care. For effective healthcare to be provided in the 21st century, data must be utilised as effectively as possible. I'm sure the government minister would share with that viewpoint. Macmillan Cancer Support have shown in North Trent that local data, when used effectively, can be used to redesign follow-up care that colorectal cancer patients receive. They have told us that by analysing the data that they managed to secure, it was discovered that more than a third of people who survive for more than 5 years have some kind of additional non-cancer complications, such as type 2 diabetes or coronary difficulties, heart problems. And by using this data, and by extension knowledge, they were able to better plan the future care that those patients received. And this principle of using complete data to look at the patient's needs surely must be applied more and more to ensure that patients get the care that they need. There's some tremendous examples of this model of care as well, also being deployed in Salford by GPs in Salford. I'd urge members right across the House to go and have a look at some of the truly innovative techniques that are being developed there. And I think, if I could indulge the House for a second, I, as an individual, completely understand how that data can lead to better patient outcomes. I think we would all recognise that. I was 2 weeks before the last general election undiagnosed. I was an undiagnosed type 1 diabetic. Rushed to hospital. Hugely grateful yet again. Place on the record my thanks to the West Cumberland Hospital for saving my life in my constituency. But the point I'd like to make is this: that every day now my life is governed by data. Blood glucose readings, insulin ratios, etc., etc., etc. I want that data to be far more easily available to me. I want it on my smartphone. At the same time, I'm actually providing that data. I want it to be provided to my pharmacist, to my GP, to the system right across the board, so that I can better control not only my condition, but the people in my situation. They can do that as well. And what a saving that would be, incidentally, for the NHS, and what a huge innovation that would be with regard to improving patient outcomes for a multiple variety of long-term conditions. So I think the Honourable Member in this bill is in exactly the right place on that. But I'd be grateful if the Honourable Member is able to set out again how the bill intends to make data sharing more consistent across the whole of the health service, because this is a challenge which we face. And we must remember, however, that where there are issues relating to data that belongs to individuals, then there are clearly issues of privacy at stake here that we have to address. It's a debate that rages across many sectors. It's routinely discussed on and offline. It's routinely discussed in this House. I've been here almost a decade now. It's hard to believe. And the issues surrounding individual personal data have been discussed throughout that decade. But nowhere is this more sharply felt, I don't think, than with regard to the use of medical data. I think it's regrettable, and I think it was avoidable in the way that the government failed with the care.data scheme. I think it severely eroded public trust with regard to how these issues are considered when it comes to assessing matters relating to data protection. Medical confidentiality is a principle that should always be respected and protected. I don't think anybody would take issue with that. And I hope, again, the Honourable Member will be able to outline what safeguards are in place in the bill to ensure that only relevant patient data is shared. Sharing unnecessary information could undermine patient trust, particularly with regard to the use of their individual data, and it could critically also slow down treatment, and that's something that we don't wish to see, of course.
I'm most grateful to him for giving way and also for setting out quite clearly from his own personal experience how important this matter is. And can I assure him that the aim of these provisions is that data is shared and only shared for the care of that individual patient. This is not about data collection. This is about patient care and safety, for which, as he rightly says, data is often so important.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for that response. I think we'll drill down into the detail of this in committee, but it's important that we get this detail absolutely right. Just to repeat the point, it absolutely is essential when it comes to getting, in order to, it's about efficacy of the care provided essentially. We've got to get it right. If we don't get this right, then we're storing up trouble for the future, I think. I think sharing relevant health information is already governed by professional obligation, of course, and he will know from his marital circumstances. And the British Medical Association has expressed the view that it's unnecessary to replace this with a statutory framework without clear justification as to why it's needed. So I hope that we'll hear at some point today justification as for why a new framework is justified. But I think one of the lessons of my party's time in office, and I think one of the lessons which I think should be learned by the government today, is that it's absolutely essential that we take medical professionals with us. If we don't take them with us, then we are putting ourselves in a difficult position. We're putting patients in a difficult position, and at the end of the day, we can devise all of the statutory and regulatory frameworks that we want. But if we can't take medical professionals with us when it comes to the application of those strategies, then we're in difficulty. And that's a lesson I think that applies to all parties in this House, right across the benches. The third part of the bill relates to objectives in relation to the regulation of health and social care professions. This section and the draft order on the objective of the General Medical Council amends the objectives of health and social care regulators and the Professional Standards Authority. Professional bodies such as the General Medical Council and the BMA have differing views on the impact that this will have in practice. The GMC states that while this bill will not impact upon the General Medical Council per se, the newly worded statutory objectives in the draft order address the aim of protecting the public and set out clearly the importance of public confidence issues when deciding on appropriate action in the public interest. The GMC also believes that the bill will align other regulators' statutory purpose with their own. The BMA, however, believe that the now separate role of both protecting the public whilst also maintaining public confidence in the professions could lead to regulatory committees and panels punishing professionals who do not pose any threat to the public. The details of this section will be subject to further scrutiny in committee, but I'd be grateful if at some point today either the Honourable Member or the Government Minister could explain how this scenario that the BMA articulate could be avoided. To repeat the point, it's essential that we take the medical professions with us on this. I think this is behind the lack of, if we consider the lack of appetite behind the application of the Francis recommendation with regard to the individual duty of candour. I think the reason that that's been effectively dropped is because the medical profession did not want to see it. They did not believe that it was enforceable, and the government listened on that point. I think we should explore in real detail their concerns on this point now. I have to say it was disappointing to see that the government did not bring forward a bill to bring forward a wider reform of the regulation of healthcare professionals in the Queen's speech. I think there was an opportunity there that has been missed. I hope the Minister will be able to explain why later today. Wider reform clearly is needed. The Nursing and Midwifery Council were disappointed not to see the bill in the Queen's speech and still say that wider legislative reform is needed too. And we must remember that this bill is an essential component for the implementation of the Francis recommendations, and without it some of the important changes recommended by Robert Francis simply cannot take place. And it's in that context that principally we support the superb efforts of the Honourable Member. This is an issue that many in the professions wanted to see addressed by the government in the Queen's speech. The government should have brought forward a bill, and clearly it can't be through a lack of parliamentary time or a packed legislative agenda that no bill is being brought forward. So I do hope there's an explanation forthcoming today as to why that bill hasn't been brought forward. But I think there's other issues too that we need to address. The principle of this bill is one that we support, and we will not be dividing the House on this matter. The details of the bill will be scrutinised further at committee stage, and I hope that both the Minister and the Honourable Member for Stafford will be able to address some of the points that I've raised today, Madam Deputy Speaker. A final point that I would make is that though the bill is an important step, cultural change in any organisation or profession is difficult and it does take a long time. There is no magic bullet, as has been said today, and we should always recognise that. I was grateful to the Honourable Member for Stafford for mentioning the regulation of the nuclear industry in his introduction of the bill today. It's something I have a lot of experience of, and I think I was the first person actually to introduce this regulatory example into this whole debate, and I think it's a very, very important comparison. The point of the comparison is this. Effective regulation is an iterative process that relies upon an effective partnership between the regulator and the regulated. Too often, regulatory bodies in a number of sectors can play cat and mouse or hide and seek with regard to those who they regulate, and this can have a serious and damaging effect, a counterproductive effect, effectively. And I think we're beginning to see this with Ofsted. Ofsted, of course, being the comparator that is used very, very often with regard to the CQC these days. And of course we want to see education standards driven up. Of course we want to see pupils receive the best education, frankly, in the world. And of course the pursuit of excellence must be constant and consistent, but we have to consider what happens when regulators begin to damage the cause that they exist to support. None of us wants to see the medical profession becoming as beleaguered as those other essential public servants in the teaching profession. That said, public services exist first and foremost for the benefit of the public, not for public servants. That's an essential principle. But iterative regulation is undoubtedly the way forward, and the safety and performance improvements in the nuclear industry over the last decade and a half clearly demonstrate this. So the change in performance in the nuclear industry came with a major regulatory recalibration in the early part of this century. Cat and mouse hide and seek regulation was actually making performance in the industry worse. Regulators shouldn't wait for failure to occur and then seek to punish. Regulators should work to stop failure occurring in the first place, in my view. And in this respect, this requires a partnership approach between the regulator and the regulated. I think there's an awful lot in this bill with regard to principle which unites this House. I'm exceptionally grateful to the Honourable Member for all of the work he's done around these issues and for bringing this bill forward. And he has the support of these benches.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the chance to respond and to set out the government's support for this very important bill, and I'm delighted that we appear this morning to have cross-party support for it. Could I start by putting on record my and the government's very strong support for the Honourable Member for Stafford, and for his tireless commitment to the cause of public safety. I think I speak for the whole House, many members not here this morning, in saying that he has commanded the respect of the whole House for the way that he has campaigned so tirelessly and with such good grace, diligence and cross-party support to make sure that the lessons of the appalling tragedy in Midstaffs have been learnt properly. And I believe again today he's demonstrated the integrity of that work, and I think that's reflected in the degree of support for this bill in the House. I wanted to pick up a number of the points that he made in his speech, and indeed those of other colleagues and members opposite who've spoken, and then turn to a number of the points that have been raised and try and deal with them. Perhaps I could first just add my name to the support that the Honourable Member for Stafford expressed for Julie Bailey, for the Honourable Member for Stone and for Ken Lowndes, all of whom have put in a huge amount of work behind the scenes in support of this bill and in support of the wider cause of patient safety. My honourable friend spoke incredibly powerfully about the 4,000 unavoidable deaths and the many thousands more of unavoidable incidents of harm, which of course are avoidable if we are better equipped to track and monitor and collect data in the way that this bill provides for, and to develop that culture of transparency and accountability which the bill makes provision for. And he talked very powerfully, I thought, about the concept of zero avoidable harm, which sits foursquare and central at the heart of this measure. And particularly powerfully, I thought he talked about the culture of health and safety, and how, as the Honourable Member opposite has reflected, in the aviation industry and in the nuclear industry, in fact, it is that culture of actively looking for near misses, actively welcoming members of staff across the organisation from top to bottom reporting problems when they're seen that has led to those industries being able to develop such exemplary health and safety records. And I think one of the great lessons of the Francis report, which comes out loud and clear, is this need for a change of culture. He also spoke very powerfully, I thought, about the science of safety and the elimination of variability in the system and the good work that is going on in this country, not least as a result of the Francis report. It's another area, another example of an area where the NHS is actually leading in global medicine. He also spoke very powerfully about the importance of integrating information and data, and I thought his account of his constituent, Janet Powell, and the journey that she'd had in helping to support her mother across the health and care landscape will have resonated with many members. It certainly resonated with me, because within the last 18 months I have myself been in a similar place, Madam Deputy Speaker, with my own mother, supporting her through a journey from primary care to hospital care to community care in Norfolk. And as many of us in this House and many millions of carers outside of this House will have experienced, it is often the carers and the parents and the loved ones of patients who are often the ones carrying the best information about the parent through the system, and that information is often too slow and doesn't keep up with the patient on their journey. I thought he spoke very powerfully about the risk-averse attitude to sharing information, which is a problem, and it's something that the government is very committed to trying to tackle, and that is another reason why we're supporting this bill. And key to that, as he touched on, are the recommendations of Dame Fiona Caldicott, and I'm absolutely delighted that she has agreed to take a lead role and accept the invitation of the Secretary of State to look at the safeguards that we need to be putting in place across the whole of the NHS and Department of Health care and data provisions, and I think that will help to provide a strong degree of reassurance to members in the House and those outside that patient concerns about confidentiality are being met. And my honourable friend also spoke very powerfully about his support for our healthcare professionals, and I'd like to add my support to his comments about NHS staff out in Africa on the front line of the fight against Ebola. We owe them all a huge debt of gratitude. We also heard from a number of other members who spoke very powerfully, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Bury North, who was kind enough to congratulate me on my role in managing to get the data sharing measures included in this bill raised before the House in my own 10-minute rule bill, which fell, but I'm delighted to see those measures picked up in this bill. And he spoke very powerfully about the NHS as a bedrock of British society, and I couldn't agree more. And I thought he made some very interesting points about the difference between the scientific and the science of healthcare and the human and compassionate and cultural side of healthcare, which it is actually, this bill goes right to the heart of, and which has always been a great strength of the NHS as in its founding charter, a scientific and research-led organisation that has always put compassionate care at the very top of its mission. My honourable friend, the member for Congleton, spoke very powerfully, again paying tribute to the NHS both as an institution and to the staff within it, and very powerfully about the importance of transparency and the importance of public confidence in the data confidentiality aspects of both this bill and more generally across the healthcare system. And the honourable member for Copeland spoke very powerfully, and I was very pleased to hear his tone and spirit in terms of cross-party support for this bill, which I think, although parliamentary time, Madam Deputy Speaker, is short in this session, with that support, I think there's every chance that this bill may have a chance of reaching the statute box, the statute book. I was particularly pleased to hear his very strong and powerful and personal support for the importance of data sharing in 21st century healthcare. He rightly highlighted Salford as a beacon of what can be achieved and a tribute to the NHS in the North West, leading in the use of informatics and medical data for both research and treatment. And I thought it was very powerful to hear him talk about his own personal experience as a diabetic patient and now his reliance on data as a patient and his active embrace of telehealth and the use of smartphones. And he spoke, I heard the phrase and noted it down, very powerfully about how that is allowing him better control of his condition. And I think patient empowerment through data and through electronic health records and through putting in place a landscape so that patient medical information flows with the patient and reflects the patient journey across the system is absolutely key to both this bill and to the government's wider proposals for building integration of health and care and a 21st century model of the NHS in which healthcare moves from being something done to patients when the system is able to do it to a model of healthcare in which active health citizens are empowered and enabled and encouraged to take more responsibility for their healthcare and to drive through the system in the way that suits them. So although, Madam Deputy Speaker, we haven't had a packed house this morning on this Friday morning, we have, I think, packed in the arguments. I think we've heard a lot of very high quality contributions. I wanted to turn now, if I may, to the bill and deal with the proposals within it, the thinking behind it, and answer some of the key questions that have been put this morning. Madam Deputy Speaker, the need to maintain minimum levels of quality much more consistently was put into very sharp focus by the landmark public inquiry report of February 2013 into the terrible, shocking and serious failings in the care provided at the former Mid Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust. I think everybody in this House would accept that the subsequent Francis report shook the health system to its core, and his call for a fundamental culture change across the entire health and social care system to put patients first at all times still resonates loudly in this chamber and through the health and care debate. Sir Robert Francis QC, the chair of the inquiry, made a very compelling call for action across 6 core themes: culture, compassionate care, leadership, standards, information and openness, transparency and candour. And it's a checklist that all of us involved in healthcare need to keep close to hand. I believe the inquiry represented a watershed in our thinking about safe and better care. And this, in turn, is driving a culture change across the NHS as we resolve never again to allow the system to fail patients and service users in the shocking way that it did. The government published its response to Robert Francis's public inquiry into the former Mid-Staff's NHS Foundation Trust on the 19th of November 2013, and that response, Hard Truths, the journey to putting patients first, demonstrates the government's commitment to creating a culture of openness with greater accountability and a relentless focus on safety in an NHS which puts compassion at its heart. In response to the events at Mid-Staffs, the recommendations of Sir Robert Francis QC and Don Berwick's excellent review into improving patient safety, the government has already introduced a number of measures to improve safety. And these include a new statutory duty of candour on providers that will help to ensure that patients are given the truth when things go wrong, and that honesty and transparency are the norm in every organisation. This new duty will be overseen by the Care Quality Commission and come into force for all NHS bodies soon and for other registered providers by April 2015. We expect staff themselves to reflect the duty in their everyday activity. An organisation is only made up of its staff in the end, and providers will be expected to implement the new duty through staff across their organisation. Training and education staff will also support the establishment of a much more open culture. The GMC, the Nursery and Midwifery Council and other professional regulators will introduce a new explicit and consistent professional duty of candour, making clear a requirement to be open whether the incident is serious or not. Secondly, the Secretary of State has announced in March a new Sign Up to Safety campaign, the platform for all NHS organisations and patients to share, learn and improve ideas for reducing harm and saving lives. Launched in June, healthcare leaders have been invited to set out what their organisations will do to strengthen patient safety, including producing a safety improvement plan. Sign Up to Safety aims to achieve much more than just the numbers of NHS organisations joining. It's also about motivating participants to actively get involved. The campaign will go beyond institutions to seek to sign as many individual staff in the NHS as possible, and everyone that chooses to join will commit to the new patient safety ambition. In order to realise the Berwick Report's vision of the NHS as an organisation devoted to continual learning and improvement, NHS England and NHS Improving Quality have established a new National Patient Safety Collaborative Programme. This will spread best practice, build skills and capabilities in patient safety and improvement science, and focus on actions that can make the biggest difference to patients in every part of the country. The safety collaboratives will be supported to systematically tackle the leading causes of harm to patients, and the programme will include establishing a patient safety improvement fellowship scheme to develop 5,000 fellows within a national faculty within 5 years. We are absolutely committed to changing the culture of patient safety through investment in leadership. NHS England is now working with the Health Foundation to help develop proposals for a safety fellowship initiative. And the NHS is on a journey through Transparency NHS Choices Patient Safety to become completely open and transparent. More information about our local health services is now more publicly available than ever before. And as well as using the information to drive improvements, it's vital that a patient or a member of the public can easily find and understand what it says about their local health services. In June, NHS Choices began publishing new and existing information in a new safety section, complementing the wealth of information available already about our hospitals and wards. And it specifically provides information on nurse staffing levels, including at ward level, infection control and cleanliness, CQC national standards, whether recommended by staff to their relatives and friends, patients assessed for risk of blood clots, responding to patient safety alerts, and open and honest reporting. The truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the NHS is one of the safest healthcare systems in the world, but there is always scope to improve healthcare standards universally and to reduce avoidable harm further. And that's why the Secretary of State for Health set the ambition to reduce avoidable harm by half and save 6,000 lives over the next 3 years. Because as well as the devastating effect that health harms can have upon patients, service users, and, as honourable members mentioned, their carers and families, a recent report by Frontier Economics has also estimated that poor care could be costing the NHS up to 2.5 billion a year. And that is also why the government has thrown its full support behind this important piece of legislation, which will do much to improve the safety of patients. With pleasure.
I'm most grateful to him and for the argument he's developing. Would he also agree with me that it is vital for staff themselves? Staff do not want to be involved in instances of avoidable harm. It preys upon their minds, it can blight their careers. If the institutions to which they belong are not seeking to avoid harm, in the end it's often the professionals rather than the institution who carry the can, and that's not right.
Well, friend, as ever, makes an incredibly powerful point. An institution is only as strong as the staff within it, and when an institution isn't taking an issue seriously that staff confront as a daily reality, it puts them in an impossible position. And by changing the culture of the institution, I think he's absolutely right. We will create a situation in which the staff in the NHS are able to do their jobs more easily, with more confidence, and safe in the knowledge that when they raise issues that may be of concern, whether in fact there's a risk or not, they will be welcomed and supported. And that culture change, I think, is absolutely vital if we're going to turn this around in the way that we are committed to doing. Madam Deputy Speaker, the three key provisions in this bill, which I would perhaps summarise as this. the provisions that will mandate safety, patient safety, as a key requirement of CQC registration. Secondly, the provisions ensuring the integration of data across the health and care pathway. And thirdly, the provisions dealing with the regulation of professional standards represent, in our view, very real and significant steps to support and develop patient safety in the NHS, and we are delighted to support them. I wanted just to take each of those three in turn, if I may. So turning first to the CQC requirements to include safety. The first clause in this bill is central to its focus on safety and quality, particularly the elimination of avoidable harm that flows from the provision of poor care in health and adult social care services. Safety is absolutely paramount and must be the focus of care providers at all times. And the experience in mid-staffs underlines the importance of this and what can happen when providers put other priorities before safety. The role of the CQC in protecting patients is vital, and safety and the avoidance of harm are absolutely key elements of the CQC's regulation of providers in two key ways. Firstly, monitoring registered providers against safety requirements and taking enforcement action when these requirements are not met is absolutely central to the CQC's objective to protect health and promote the health, safety and welfare of people who use the services. And so, I'd be delighted to give way.
I'm most grateful to him. He's being incredibly generous. Would he also agree with me that the provision of this bill to really get that right to the top, to make it the responsibility of the Secretary of State, ensures that right here in this House, patient safety is of the essence?
Well, I'm grateful. My honourable friend makes another really important point about leadership in the culture change that we're seeking to drive. I think all members of the House would acknowledge the Secretary of State's personal commitment to this crusade for personal safety, and it is symptomatic of the level of leadership that's required. If in every trust, in every organisation in the NHS, the leader, the accountable senior executive, makes very clear their personal commitment to this agenda, it helps to change the culture and helps to create conditions in which reporting of patient safety issues and concerns is welcomed and encouraged. Madam Deputy Speaker, safety is also a critical component of the CQC's new inspection regime, and one of the 5 key questions the Chief Inspectors ask when rating the quality of services. Currently, it's at the Secretary of State's discretion as to whether registration requirements should cover safety of care. This clause removes that discretion and instead places a new duty on the Secretary of State to impose registration requirements about safety of care. And it's a duty that we welcome because it absolutely fits with the government's wider commitment to put patient safety right at the heart of our health and care system. This duty will cover all providers registered with the CQC across health and, importantly, adult social care, and help ensure that no avoidable harm will come to patients and service users when they're being provided with a regulated service. It's important to say at this point that the duty will not place an obligation on the Secretary of State to ensure that care or treatment is risk-free. No Secretary of State could ever give that undertaking. Healthcare provision is of its nature and can be a risky business. Chemotherapy, for example, saves lives but can have very significant side effects. A test of reasonableness must be applied in assessing whether harm is avoidable. The registration requirements that are currently before Parliament do cover safety and will allow the CQC to take action against poor providers in a way that has not been possible up until now. The Government therefore welcomes this clause. It reinforces what the regulations are seeking to achieve and will ensure that the key message of safety and harm reduction runs consistently through the CQC regulation and across the system as a whole for years to come. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to turn to clauses 2 and 3, which deal with the key changes requiring a common identifier and the duty to inform other healthcare professionals along the care pathway. Far too often in our system, patients lead and their information follows, and far too often across our healthcare system, particularly as patients migrate between primary hospital and community care, they and often their loved ones are left driving the patient journey without access to the necessary information, and too often healthcare professionals don't have access to the very latest information on the treatment that their patient has received in another part of our health and care system. And that's why we welcome these clauses. Clauses 2 and 3 concern the sharing of information by providers and commissioners to support people's direct care and treatment as an essential part of the delivery of safe, effective and high-quality care. The sharing of timely, accurate and relevant information facilitates the provision of integrated care and treatment tailored to people's needs and wishes. And yet we know that this sharing doesn't always happen as it should. Anxiety about information governance and data protection can stifle the sharing of information between staff and organisations working together to care for an individual. And clauses 2 and 3 will require that providers and commissioners of publicly funded health and adult social care share the information which is so essential to the delivery of safe and high quality care. And this will relate only to the way information is shared by organisations directly involved in an individual's direct care. Clause 2 places a duty on providers and commissioners within scope to record and use consistent identifiers in people's health and care records and correspondence. This includes a requirement to include the identifier when sharing information with other organisations directly involved in that individual's care. Clause 3 places...
Could I just ask the Minister, he doesn't need to explain the whole bill. The promoter's done that, and the government has said that it supports the bill, so I'm just at a bit of a loss why the Minister doesn't appear to be giving us any new information, but is reiterating what's already been said. Perhaps he could clarify a bit more, but we don't need a commentary on every clause.
Well, no, Madam Deputy, I completely understand that I wouldn't intend to give you a commentary on every line of the bill. That will be in committee, but I thought it was important, given the government is supporting this private member's bill as part of our wider commitment, that I set out why and on what basis we're supporting it, and give some guidance to the House on where in committee there may be differences and where and why the government is taking the view that we are. But I will heed your comments and make sure that I keep my remarks at an appropriately high level.
Order. Absolutely, I agree with the Minister. We would be interested to hear if the government had any qualifications and where they were that would give the House in time to consider what would be occurring in committee. So I look forward to hearing him say that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's important, I think, in looking at clauses 2 and 3 to recognise that this only relates to the way information is shared by organisations directly involved in an individual's direct care. My honourable friend made the point that this bill is solely focused on the needs of the patient. This isn't in any way about the government or the NHS seeking to collect information for any other purpose other than to make sure that patient care is first and foremost in the system. Clause 3 places an express duty for direct care providers and commissioners of public funded health and adult social care. When providing care to an individual, organisations within scope would be required to ensure that relevant information is shared with staff within their organisation and also within other organisations along the care pathway, where it is in the individual's best interest. And this duty would only apply where this would directly facilitate the individual's care and where it would be in his or her best interest. Not only will this support the delivery of safe, effective and integrated care, we believe it will improve people's experience of their care and support, sparing them the frustration of having to tell their story over and over as they move along the care pathway. But simply sharing isn't enough. In order to fully realise the benefits of sharing information, we believe it's vital that the information shared is accurate, relevant and timely. And in order to provide safe and high-quality care, especially where it's urgent or where multiple care teams are involved, information needs to follow the person so that professionals can access the right information at the right time. And using a consistent identifier is essential to this aim, to ensure that the information being shared relates to the right individual. And Madam Deputy Speaker, a number of people have asked about the common identifier. Clause 2 places this duty on the Secretary of State to make regulations which will specify the consistent identifier to be used. But I should say, for the benefit of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's the intention of the Government that the prescribed identifier should be the NHS number. The universal use of the NHS number is a long-standing priority of the department, ensuring that records include a person's NHS number, especially when patients move between providers on their care pathway, is vital to the safety and quality of care. And a number of honourable members asked about our view of the appropriate identifier. We believe that consistent use of the NHS number will facilitate the coordination of care, reduce errors and support the integration of records. Ensuring a reliable and seamless transfer of information is all the more vital when a patient is a vulnerable person. For example, an elderly patient with dementia and many complex needs, for whom large institutions can be difficult to navigate at the very best of times. I must stress that these duties are strictly limited to sharing for direct care purposes, with only those organisations directly involved in the provision of care and only where it's in the patient's interests. Let me be clear, this will not permit or require sharing of information for any other purpose. This duty would not apply where there are good reasons for it not to apply, including an individual objecting to his or her information being shared, or to his or her NHS number being used, or where the individual would be likely to object, or an individual receives services anonymously, for example, as one honourable member mentioned, in sexual health services. I'll happily give way.
I'm most grateful to him for again being most generous. Would he agree with me that one of the things that should this bill come on the support of this House at second reading that would need to be looked at in committee is this very real issue of the mixing up of personal information and patient information within records, and that's something that really will need quite a lot of discussion as to how best this can be addressed.
Well, my honourable friend makes a really excellent point. There are, as he's well aware, a number of initiatives, Madam Deputy Speaker, on data across the health and care system, and that's why the Secretary of State has appointed Dame Fiona Caldecott to advise the government and to look at the pilots that we're currently, NHS England is currently running on care.data. And I think it'll be really important in committee, he's right, that the data provisions of this bill and the confidentiality provisions and guarantees are closely discussed and understood and that there's no confusion about the purpose for which the data provisions in this bill are being put, which are solely to do with patient safety. Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to Clause 4, this clause importantly creates a power for the Secretary of State to make regulations to exclude certain provisions which would take them outside the scope of the new duties for continuity of information. The Government intends to make regulations that will exclude providers and commissioners of children's social care and providers and commissioners of children's health care within the Department for Education's purview. These exclusions will include local authorities and other organisations exercising educational functions and children's social service functions, children's homes and residential family centres, fostering and adoption support agencies and certain schools, nurseries and educational institutions. And I'm delighted to tell the House that the Department of Health and the Department for Education are working together to support information and sharing use of the NHS number where appropriate by these organisations. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know well that the use of patient data can arouse significant public concerns and controversy and often highly charged debates, and the public rightly expect to see their data held securely and used only for their benefit, and that sits absolutely foursquare at the heart of these proposals. And that's why NHS England have taken back the care.data proposals to review and revise and pilot, and why we've appointed Dame Fiona Caldecott. The information sharing provisions of this bill are solely concerned with the sharing of information between health and care providers, where it is in an individual's direct care interests. To summarise, the consistent patient identifier and information sharing provisions we believe will support three key things: better informed care decisions, leading to care and treatment better tailored to people's needs and preferences, and better health and care outcomes; safer care with a reduced likelihood of errors, adverse events and suboptimal care stemming from a lack of information; and improved experience of care, individuals called upon less and less to repeat their story, and having increased confidence that the person caring for them has all the information they need. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted just to turn briefly to the third and final section of the bill, which deals with the regulation for the PSA and for the professional regulator. We welcome these clauses, which will bring in a consistent objective for the Professional Standards Authority and for the regulators of certain health and care professionals, including dentists, nurses, midwives and opticians. We believe they'll ensure that public protection is at the heart of what the regulators do. This measure isn't about changing what the authority or the professional regulators do in relation to professional regulation. It's about ensuring a coherent, strategic approach by them in the performance of their functions. Patients and the public need to understand the role and purpose of those organisations that regulate our health professionals in order to have confidence in what the regulators do. And I believe having clear and consistent objectives is vital to that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to touch on the automatic erasure provisions which my honourable friend mentioned had been withdrawn. The intent of this policy is to enable the regulators to automatically erase individuals tried and convicted of certain serious crimes from a professional register. However, it would be necessary to amend the existing statutory framework for each of the regulators to properly achieve the policy and would result in a bill that's much longer and more complex than is usually acceptable for a private member's bill. So in light of this, we took the position that the automatic erasure should not be taken forward given the complexity of the drafting required to achieve that policy. Automatic erasure was one of the areas considered by the Law Commission in its review of the regulation of health professions. And the Government remains committed to legislate on this important issue at the earliest opportunity. We've explored all other possible legislative options for taking forward issues arising from that piece of work by the Law Commission in this session and would therefore propose to take forward automatic erasure in a future parliamentary session alongside other measures in response to the Law Commission's review. The long title of this bill, which sets its scope, specifically mentions the intention to provide for automatic erasure, but I believe my honourable friend has indicated his intention to table an amendment at committee stage in order to remove that from the long title. Madam Deputy Speaker, when I talk to people about this bill, I'm asked one or two key questions which I believe those watching this debate will want to hear us answer and which the honourable member opposite has asked me to deal with. The first is, aren't my medical records already shared with others involved in my care? And unfortunately, as I explained today, the sharing of information about your care is not as widespread in the system as it needs to be. And those who use the NHS the most often are often those who have the most to remember. And it can be very frustrating for health professionals. And too often, that lack of information is actually involved in the misdiagnosis and the mistakes that my honourable friend referred to at the beginning. The second question we're often asked is, don't these regulators already put patient safety at the heart of everything they do, which is a fair question. Well, in regards to the regulators, the CQC and the professional regulators are all there primarily to protect us. The measures in this bill are not a reflection of any failure in that respect. However, these organisations are given legitimacy through legislation. Their remit and ability to act is defined in law, and it's important that we believe that their legislative basis is explicit about their respective role and duty in public safety. It is not our intention that this bill, if it becomes law, would result in a dramatic change to the way that these regulators operate on a day-to-day basis. We know that they're already focused on patient safety. What this bill does is enshrine this focus and make sure that these organisations are never hindered in their important work. So we believe this bill is a big step forward, and I would urge honourable members from both sides of the House to give it support. We will be publishing a comprehensive update on achievements to date and the progress towards Sir Robert Francis' vision of a system delivering safe, compassionate care later in the year. Madam Deputy Speaker, the events of Mid-Staffs were a shocking reminder of the systemic failings in patient safety and care which occur when the culture and practice of healthcare institutions cease to prioritise the human, the compassionate and the cultural aspects of healthcare. And I'm delighted to be able today to support this bill, which fits very well with the Secretary of State's crusade for accountability, transparency and patient safety. And it complements the various measures that we're putting in place as a government to support patient empowerment and the integration of health and care and the need for seamless information which follows patients rather than patients so often traversing the care pathway without that information to hand. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are two other questions that I was...
Now, with respect to the Minister, I said to him nearly 15 minutes ago, with regard to his comments on this bill. He has now been speaking for 47 minutes to tell us how much the government agrees with this bill. There are other bills to be debated this morning, and so I tried asking the Minister very nicely and gently. Now I'm saying to the Minister directly, it's not his job to use up time in the House. Could he please conclude what are the major points on this bill? Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've concluded my prepared remarks. I just wanted to deal, if I may, with the questions that were asked in the House of me, not least by the members.
Well, with respect to the Minister, he should have integrated those into his remarks on the bill, because I presume he was listening to the comments of the other speakers. He has now been speaking for longer, or nearly as long, as the rest of the debate. And this is not really acceptable, Minister, given that there are other bills to be done this morning, and this bill seems to have the wholehearted support of the department. So, the word succinct must be in the Minister's mind, which means brief, and I will interrupt him again if he's not. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for that clarification. Perhaps in which case I could merely make clear the questions and I could deal with them by writing to members who've raised them with me after the debate. Perhaps that would be appropriate. There were important questions about the Law Commission, some of which I've addressed, but I will write more fully. The honourable member opposite asked me about the duty of candour dropped by pressure from professionals, and if he's happy, I'll drop him a line on that. There were a question as well from the bench opposite about the care.data issue. I think I've dealt with them in my comments, but please feel free to pick up with me if there's any omissions. There were important comments about the BMA, Madam Deputy Speaker, which I'm taking your guidance to mean I shouldn't address, but their briefing arrived on my desk this morning, and obviously I will look at it very carefully and write to members with our position on the concerns that they've raised, although I do note that their report also seems to have a lot of support for the intent of this bill. Lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was a question about making data sharing much more consistent, and I wanted to confirm that the Department of Health is working with our partners and will produce guidance to support compliance across the system. On that basis, Madam Deputy Speaker, following your guidance, I will resume my seat and express again our support for this important measure.
Mr. Jeremy Lefroy, with leave of the House.
With the leave of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker. And most very briefly, just if my bill should receive the consent of the House at second reading, then I've taken very clearly from this very important debate, and most grateful to my honourable friend from Bury North, from Congleton, the honourable gentleman from Copeland, and indeed the Minister himself for the points they've made. There are two things that seem to me that we have to discuss very deeply in committee. One is justification of all the clauses. I believe they are justified for the reasons I've set out in my earlier remarks, and I will not rehearse them again. And secondly, the details, particularly around privacy. With that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank you very much for your indulgence.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Off-patent drugs bill, second reading.
Say now. Mr. Evans, if you could just wait while I take the point of order. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sorry to detain the House briefly. Madam Deputy Speaker, you may be aware that the Shadow Home Secretary has asked the Home Secretary to make a statement on the publication of the Oneness report into reports that the Home Office misplaced files related to child sex abuse allegations. And yet the Home Secretary has so far declined to say that she would. We now see, Madam Deputy Speaker, this morning that the media are reporting details from the Oneness report. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to ask you, after the bungling of the child sex abuse inquiry, do you think it would be appropriate and wise, given the seriousness, for the Home Secretary to make an oral statement on Monday so that the House is able to have complete transparency on the important issues around the Oneness report?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that that is not a point of order for the chair today. I understand that the Walnuts report is to be published. I'm sure the Treasury benches heard very clearly his points, and it is open to him to pursue that subsequently if he's not satisfied with the response, but it's not a point of order for me today. So if we can go back to Mr. Jonathan Evans to move second reading of his bill.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, only a handful of MPs are ever successful in the private member's ballot, and I'm therefore delighted and honoured that 22 years after I was first elected to this House, and now in my final year of parliamentary service, I have at long last joined this rather select group, and I have the opportunity to present a bill on such an important matter. First, let me thank my fellow sponsors and MPs from all sides of the House who have shown such support and interest in my bill. The passionate welcome that it has received has been truly amazing, though not surprising given the challenges it addresses. It's not just in Parliament that this support has been shown. Leading charities, senior distinguished clinicians in many medical disciplines, and thousands of private individuals across the country have responded with enthusiasm and have shown unqualified support for this measure. Just yesterday, the Times letter page led with a joint appeal to the Minister and to the Government in favour of this bill from the Association of Medical Research Charities, from Breast Cancer Care, Leukemia and Lymphoma Research, Breakthrough Breast Cancer, the Alzheimer's Society, the Multiple Sclerosis Society, Leukemia Care, Breast Cancer Care and the Cure Parkinson's Trust. And I would also particularly like to thank Jenny Goodair and Mia Rosenblatt of Breast Cancer Campaign for all the help that they've given me in bringing forward my bill. So why the question of access to off-patent drugs? The problem goes back many years and is caused by a gap in the licensing system. The system is set up on the basis that a pharmaceutical company which wants to market any particular new drug acts as the drug's sponsor throughout the process. Well, this is fine and clearly understandable when that company anticipates many years of patent protection for its new product. However, the essence of the problem my bill addresses is that there is no mechanism in place to ensure the routine availability of existing drugs where that patent protection has expired, and when those drugs may later be clearly shown to be clinically effective, but in a new way and for a new purpose. Every time previously licensed drugs are shown to be effective for a new purpose, a new license is needed to certify the drug's safety at whatever the dose may be and for that particular purpose. And then it has to be authorised to be marketed for use in this way. However, if the drug is no longer patent protected, there's no organisation or individual which will take on the role of seeking any necessary licence for that treatment. This is because after the patent has expired, other drug companies can also produce and market generic versions of the drug, and so the price of the product is driven down through the simple expedient of competition. It follows that the incentive for any pharmaceutical company to act as the advocate or sponsor for an off-patent drug and apply for a new licence is lost. Now, the outcome of all this is that off-patent drugs, which should be routinely available at extremely low cost, effectively have no sponsor. Without a change in the system, no one is ever likely to take forward a licence application for off-patent drugs, even when they may be effective in these new purposes. In fact, it remains illegal to advertise and sell such drugs for such purposes if in fact the drug is not licensed. What this all boils down to is that off-patent, repurposed drugs are just not routinely available on the NHS, despite minimal cost to the taxpayer and the clearly clinically proven health benefits. Now, we may hear today of the ability of general practitioners to prescribe a drug outside the terms defined by a licence, what's known as off-label prescribing. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, in view of earlier experience, we may hear a lot about that. But the reality is that in clinical practice, the situation is much, much more complex, and there are many disincentives to prescribing off-label. A small number of clinicians may well be comfortable prescribing drugs off-label in certain limited circumstances. But we know from the chemo prevention example, which the Minister himself quoted in the earlier debate, that this isn't happening on any substantial scale. We also know that the absence of a licence is deterring many clinicians and GPs from prescribing these life-saving drugs in their new indications. Now, medical charities and senior distinguished clinicians have said it's just not good enough to rely upon the promotion of better information about off-label indications between clinicians. A licence, I'm very happy to, yes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If they are off licence, are they likely to be in a chemist? Do chemists keep, stores of these drugs?
Well, invariably the drugs in question are drugs which have been licensed for other uses. But it transpires that those drugs are being currently researched, as I will outline in further remarks that I will make, and that research is showing that they can be used effectively in another way. The problem is, without licensing, they're not being used in that way, and that's the kernel of the problem that I'm seeking to highlight. So a license gives a clear indication to general practitioners that a drug is both safe and effective, and as such it's preferable that indications that could achieve such a license are supported to get one. In my view, it's an unacceptable situation that we face where a cost-effective drug is not made routinely available for new and proven effective use. And while a small number of people might be fortunate enough to get the drug, a far greater number with exactly the same condition, in exactly the same clinical circumstances, but with a different GP, will not. And in my view, this is the worst form of inequality. I want to highlight just one scandalous example of the failure, red tape and bureaucracy of our current licensing system. The passive approach to the flaw that I've highlighted has meant that for all of 15 years, the chemoprevention drug tamoxifen was routinely available to women in the United States of America to prevent the development of breast cancer, but not to thousands of women at risk here in the UK. This wasn't because the research evidence is any different between the United States of America and the UK. It's because under our licensing system, there's just no one to request that this treatment should become routinely available. So for 15 long years, nothing whatsoever happened. And thousands of women here in Britain were denied treatment which it has been clinically proven could have prevented the development of breast cancer in very many cases. It wasn't, in fact, until 2013 that the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, NICE, eventually recommended the use of tamoxifen in the UK in guidelines on the management of familial breast cancer. But this still stopped short of licensing because of the flaw to which I've referred. As a result, the NICE guidance has proved insufficient to ensure equal access, and there's no evidence that it has significantly changed clinical practice. The uptake of these treatments is lower and less uniform than if the drug were licensed. Furthermore, due to the infrequency with which NICE guidelines are updated and the impact they have, this is not a mechanism that could be widely employed to make off-patent drugs available. And the example of tamoxifen, I believe, starkly confirms this. I'm very happy to do so.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Can I say I entirely agree with him in what he said so far, and indeed I want to lend my personal support to his private member's bill and wish him well in the second reading. Indeed, several dozen of my constituents have contacted me about this in support of the bill and specifically asked me to come along today to represent them in the chamber on this matter and to vote for the second reading if indeed there is a vote. And I certainly hope there isn't any talking out of his bill.
I'm very, very grateful to the honourable gentleman for that contribution. If he will forgive me, I won't go further down the path of responding because of the point that he just made at the end. Sadly, all existing off-patent drugs that reduce the risk of people developing breast cancer fall into this category. The leading proven chemoprevention drugs, tamoxifen and raloxifene. And these drugs, which reduce the risk of breast cancer developing in high-risk women by about a third, are not licensed for this purpose. With nearly 500,000 women in England and Wales being eligible for these low-cost treatments, there is an urgent need to address barriers to chemoprevention drugs being prescribed. The cost of tamoxifen is 6p a day. the cost of raloxifene is 61 pence a day. And a third chemoprevention drug, anastrozole, initially developed as a hormone therapy, has been shown to reduce the risk of breast cancer developing by a half and with fewer side effects. The evidence is there, but what action can be taken to ensure routine availability of these treatments? And I must say, the answer currently, Madam Speaker, is none, or very little.
The Honourable Gentleman give way.
I will give way.
Without trying to talk out anything, because I'm totally in support of what the Honourable Gentleman is trying to do. But couldn't NICE do this sort of thing?
Well, my honourable friend, yet again, anticipates another part of the remarks that I will make, because the second part of my bill is about giving a certain responsibility to the Secretary of State to encourage NICE to take forward what are known as technology appraisals. I'll deal with that in a little bit more detail in due course, but he's quite right. But I would say not exclusively. Licensing is the major problem. Now, within the next few months, we know that major new research will be published that provides evidence that bisphosphonates, drugs originally licensed for the treatment of bone fractures in adults with advanced cancer, are effective in early breast cancer and reducing the risk of the disease spreading to the bone in postmenopausal women. This analysis of phase 3 clinical trials is likely to show that in postmenopausal women with early breast cancer, this therapy reduces the 10-year risk of breast cancer spreading to the bone by 34% and the risk of dying from breast cancer by 17%. I would like us just to reflect on that for a moment. A 17% reduction in the risk of dying for women from breast cancer. What would be the cost for any new treatment that might develop such a result? Probably tens of thousands of pounds. And we would be paying, we'd want to pay those costs for such impressive results. But zoledronic acid, that's the name of the preparation here, a type of bisphosphonate drug, can actually be given to postmenopausal women every 6 months for 3 to 5 years and reduce the risk of breast cancer spreading to the bone, to reduce this risk by a third, reducing the risk of death from breast cancer by 6 months, by a sixth, and it would cost less than 5 pence a day. So bisphosphonates are off-patent drugs and produced relatively cheaply by numerous pharmaceutical companies. It touches on the point that my honourable friend mentioned earlier on. It's therefore pretty certain that under the current flawed licensing system, no organisation will seek a licence to use this treatment in preventing secondary breast cancer, even when the evidence is published, and these drugs will not be routinely available to the women who clearly need them. I want to pay tribute to the distinguished breast cancer clinicians and researchers who've been speaking out about this issue for years. 16 of them wrote to the Times on the date of the first reading of my bill. They said for some time it's been clear there's a real barrier to licensing old drugs for new purposes, even when they are effective. This means that treatments which could bring real benefits to the lives of people, and in some cases be life-saving with minimal cost, are just not routinely available. It's not just access to treatments for cancer at stake here. The current system will fail us for any medical condition in the future if we do not correct this flaw. The Multiple Sclerosis Society have made it clear that there are a number of repurposed medicines that have shown strong preliminary evidence that they could be effective in the treatment of multiple sclerosis, but the UK currently lacks a system by which these drugs could be relicensed. In the past, the Society has written directly to the Minister, and they wrote directly in support of my bill. In a letter co-signed by Professor Sue Pavitt, the chair of the United Kingdom's Multiple Sclerosis Clinical Trials Network, and other leading specialists in the field. They cite the example of simvastatin, a drug originally licensed for treating high cholesterol, which has been shown to be effective in slowing brain atrophy in secondary progressive MS by over 40%. Whilst final evidence from a phase 3 clinical trial is required to confirm these results, if successful, this drug would address a significant unmet need, but there's currently no treatment that can otherwise slow or stop the deterioration that we see in progressive MS. However, the MS Society also point out that given that simvastatin's patent has expired, this treatment will require a license in order to be made widely available to people with MS on the NHS, and they argue that the mechanism to achieve this just does not currently exist, despite repurposing of previously licensed drugs being a fast and cost-effective way to provide new treatments. These eminent clinicians and the MS Society have strongly supported my bill. They support the mechanism that it creates to potentially provide access to medicines that could help tens of thousands of people with untreatable MS. The treatment of Parkinson's disease is another area that can greatly benefit from the bill. I know Tom Isaacs, the president and the co-founder of the Cure Parkinson's Trust charity, has written to the minister in the past week to clearly point out the charity's full support for my bill. Tom has said Parkinson's may not be a life sentence, but at the moment may not be a death sentence, but at the moment it's a life sentence. There is increasing evidence that a number of off-patent drugs have the ability to slow and stop or reverse our condition, and under the circumstances, the ability for patients to have a clearly defined way to make these medications accessible is now imperative. Well, since I'm sure the Minister may, I think it would be appropriate if I turn to the detail of the bill, Madam Deputy Speaker. To address the anomaly I've outlined, the bill introduces a new advocate, the Secretary of State or a body appointed by him, for off-patent repurposed drugs in the existing new UK licensing system. The advocate would have to act in the public interest. They'd act in circumstances where no other body has taken on the role of seeking a licence. The level of evidence that would be required to trigger the advocate to seek a licence for an off-patent drug in a new indication would have to be significant. The treatments referred to under the mechanism would require to meet exactly the same standards as any licence for any other treatment. So nobody is lowering the bar in terms of the licensing process. This bill does not seek to make any unproven treatments available to patients. It simply seeks to address a clear market failure in the current system and to allow proven drugs to be considered for a licence after their patents have expired. Clinicians have also suggested the supplementary provision in the bill for NICE. This is the point that was raised by my honourable friend earlier on, who is sadly now not in his place, to appraise off-patent drugs in new indications where these are unlicensed. This is an exceptional route, anticipated to be used on rare occasions. Regulations would outline the very specific and significant standards that would need to be met before this provision is triggered. Now, whilst it may already be possible under existing legislation for NICE to appraise drugs for an unlicensed indication, this bill would simply place a duty on the Secretary of State to direct NICE to conduct such technology appraisals for an off-patent drug in a new indication which satisfies the new high evidence threshold. The Minister has stated publicly that the government firmly believe that cost-effective, clinically appropriate drugs and devices should be routinely available to NHS patients. Whilst I recognise and applaud the admirable steps that this government has taken to improve access to new cancer treatments, the Cancer Drugs Fund has been established for England. It has a budget of over 280 million a year. It's an incredible scheme. It's improved access to treatments for thousands of patients in England. I've seen for myself the disadvantage for my own constituents have faced by not having an equivalent fund in Wales. But on the Cancer Drugs Funds, we're currently spending millions on new treatments. So I ask the Minister, why not improve access to treatments that cost just pennies? Treatments that we know can save and improve lives. In future, there will be drugs for conditions including Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, breast cancer, Alzheimer's and others that can benefit from this bill. And we cannot wait 15 years longer than other countries for our constituents to get these treatments, as happened with tamoxifen, and then tolerate a postcode lottery as to whether our constituents get the treatments or not.
Well, my honourable friend, give way.
Very good.
My honourable friend, giving way. And may I congratulate him on bringing forward this brilliant bill. And if it doesn't succeed soon, it will certainly succeed in the future, because it seems to be unanswerable logic. Can my honourable friend explain why he's thought that the government is against this bill?
Well, let me say I think that it'll be for my friend the Minister to make the case of the government as we go along, although I certainly hope that it will be not any lengthier than the case I'm endeavouring to make. It is simply not acceptable, in my view, that we sit back and hope for the best. I think we will be letting our constituents down by such a stance. I've heard it said the bill's not necessary. better information for GPs and clinicians may be the answer. But the reality is that addressing this licensing flaw that I have outlined in the current system is, in my view, the only way that is going to effectively tackle the issue. So I say to colleagues, let's take the opportunity to act. Let's deliver real change for those who are affected by cancer, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, so many other conditions. That's what the charities supporting them and the senior clinicians specialising in treating them are asking for. By taking forward this bill, we can really save and improve lives. If we tinker at the margins, we will not. For those who really want change, who really want people in this country to have access to the best treatments available, I believe the answer is before us and it's clear. A legislative solution is necessary. By passing this bill, we have an opportunity to change and to save our constituents' lives, and I hope we take it.
Yeah.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Jamie Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Cardiff North for introducing an excellent, concise bill, one which we on this side of the House support fulsomely. I will keep my remarks fairly brief, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think there's plenty of time for us to do the business with this bill this morning. The principle of this bill is one which the Labour Party supports, the opposition supports, and we must do all that we can do to ensure that patients have timely access to safe drugs. And the impact of this bill, the Honourable Member for Cardiff North points out, would be beneficial to very many people indeed. There is no doubt that the subject of off-patent drugs is an issue that needs debating, and even more importantly, requires action from us in this House. And now that we're aware of these issues, it would frankly be remiss of us not to do something about it. So we will be supporting this bill. We're supporting it to ensure that people at risk of or who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, for people with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, leukemia and many others, as well as for all the people that may be diagnosed with any of these conditions in the future, have access to treatments that they would otherwise be denied. Treatments that are effective, treatments that are low cost, treatments that change lives. I hope that the Government is also going to support this potentially life-saving, and as the Honourable Member points out, life-changing bill. The Minister for Life Sciences himself has stated that a central part of his mission is to, quote, accelerate the discovery, design and adoption of new drugs in the National Health Service, making the UK the best place in the world to discover and design 21st century healthcare technologies. And for Britain to be, I again quote, once again the best place in the world to discover new medicines and to be treated by them. Now, that's an aim we all share, and we do have our work cut out in that regard, but it is achievable. Existing drugs can demonstrate great benefits, but do not have licences under which to be marketed, meaning that access to them is currently very low. Often a repurposed drug offers the best hope of a step change in treatment and therefore should not be forgotten or deprioritised. And the views of clinicians on this issue have been exceptionally powerful. To quote just a few, to hark back to the previous debate, we should listen to medical professionals when they're giving us advice which is frankly beyond dispute. But to quote just a few clinicians, Professor Anthony Howell, Professor of Medical Oncology and the Research Director of the Genesis Breast Cancer Prevention Centre at the University Hospital of South Manchester NHS Foundation Trust says, I quote, clinically proven therapies to reduce the risk of breast cancer developing and spreading could bring a step change in breast cancer survival rates, but without the bill we will not see a step change in the availability of these treatments. Professor Robert Coleman, Yorkshire Cancer Research Professor of Medical Oncology at the Sheffield Cancer Research Centre says, repurposed bisphosphonate drugs could significantly reduce the risk of breast cancer spreading and ultimately killing women and would cost the NHS very little. However, without the bill, we are unlikely to see the wholesale change in prescribing behaviour that would be required to make these drugs routinely available. Dr Jeremy Chataway, Consultant Neurologist, National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery, Queen's Square, University College Foundation, NHS Trust, London and St Mary's Hospital, Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust says, there are currently repurposed medicines that have shown strong preliminary evidence that they could be effective in the treatment of multiple sclerosis. However, the UK is currently lacking a system by which old drugs can be relicensed for new purposes. This bill would create a mechanism to potentially provide access to medicines that could help tens of thousands of people with untreatable multiple sclerosis. It's also powerful to see that the bill is supported by a whole spectrum of medical charities, as the Honourable Member